there was one person I interviewed for the book who saw a Miyawaki forest when he was younger, and it was a few decades old by that time. But it was planted at Yokohama University, and he said to his dad, "Wow, they really planted this university very carefully not to disturb the forest that was already here." His dad said, "No, well, actually, they planted the forest pretty recently, but it looked so mature and natural that it seemed like it had always been there, and even preceding the university."
Good evening for some viewers. Good morning here in Massachusetts. My name is Paula Phipps. I'm here to welcome you to this, I think, 15th session of the series Life Saves the Planet, co-presented by Biodiversity for a Livable Climate and the GBH Forum Network. We are really delighted and honored today to be talking about Miyawaki foresting here and globally. Without further ado, I want to introduce David Morimoto, who's our moderator this evening. David is known to those of you who've watched this series before. He is many-talented. He's an ecologist and ornithologist with a specialty in urban birds. He's a conservation biologist, an animal behaviorist, a complexity scientist, and somebody very interested in citizen science, which does go quite nicely with Miyawaki foresting. So David officially is professor of biology at Lesley University and chair of the Natural Sciences and Mathematics divisions there.
I'm really excited about this today. I'm really looking forward to learning a lot about Miyawaki forests. And Hannah Lewis is author of Mini Forest Revolution, using the Miyawaki Method to rapidly rewild the world. And she's a freelance writer focusing on people, nature, and conservation. In addition, she edits the Compendium of Scientific and Practical Findings Supporting Eco-Restoration to Address Global Warming, which is a compendium of works that, if you haven't seen it yet, it's published by the Biodiversity for a Livable Climate on their website. She worked for many years supporting sustainable food systems in the Midwest before she pivoted toward the intertwining crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. She has a BA in environmental studies from Middlebury College and an MS in sustainable agriculture and sociology from Iowa State University. And she grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and lived in France with her partner and their two children when she was writing this book. And Daan Bleichrodt is a product developer, trainer, writer, and illustrator. He works as, and I love this title, Chief Tree Planting Officer at the IVN Nature Education. And for the past 7 years, he's led the Tiny Forest movement, which is synonymous with the Mini Forest movement revolution in the Netherlands. And his team has helped to develop and create 250 tiny forests, which I can't wait to hear about, in public places, gardens, and business parks. And Dan is passionate, as I am, about reconnecting urban kids to nature, something that I think is one of the missing ingredients in the whole equation here. So I'm really excited about this, and Hannah is going to start with some short presentation, and followed by Dan, and then we'll field questions.
Well, thank you for the introduction, David, and to Paula and Biodiversity for a Livable Climate and GBH Forum for hosting and giving me this chance to present my book, Mini Forest Revolution, which is available now from Chelsea Green Publishing. So let's start with the title. Why Mini Forest Revolution? What does that mean? Well, let's break it apart into each word. And when we're talking about a forest can be defined in many ways. It can be something that looks a bit like a timber plantation, or it can look something like this, which is a natural forest. And so For our purposes today, we're talking about a natural forest that looks something like this, which is a biological community dominated by trees and many other plants and animals and microorganisms that are interacting with each other and with the environment as a functional unit. So now mini forest, well, that is quite literally a small version of that forest that we just saw and talked about. But there's something really special about a mini forest or a tiny forest, which is that it is planted by us. And it's planted in the small areas around where we live and work, such as at a school, at a roadside, edge of a parking lot, or on a riverbank like this. And so typically what we do is we plant about 600 tree and shrub species of diverse varieties, diverse species, into an area about the size of a tennis court. And these little ecosystems become cooling, air cleansing, carbon and water cycling wildlife habitats pretty quickly. So the pictures here are from Cameroon, which is one of the stories featured in the book. And in this place, they wanted to plant a mini forest to recharge groundwater in this water catchment area, which people depend on for drinking water. And so on the left, you have the mini forest site just after it was planted in March 2020. In the upper right, you have the people who planted it. And in the lower right, you have what the site looks like a year and a half after it was planted. So it grew in really nicely and quickly. Now, what do we mean by revolution? Well, I'm going to start by reading this quote from Akira Miyawaki and Elgene Obox, who co-authored The Healing Power of Forests. The process of restoring green environments to residential and industrial neighborhoods, as well as to spaces in and around transportation and other public facilities, cannot be limited to mere decoration. So in this sense, the word revolution refers to a paradigm shift where planting a mini forest is a landscaping approach whose primary aim is not decoration or mere ornamentation, but the main goals of planting a mini forest are to restore ecosystems and to connect people to nature. And when ecosystem regeneration is your main goal, the visual outcome is different. So on the left, you have more traditional plantings where you see a single tree species planted kind of spaciously in a long line. And then on the right, you have a few different pictures of mini forests. And to my eyes, the pictures on the right look like vegetation that might have grown there all on its own without ever having been planted. And so essentially, instead of planting trees one by one as individuals in isolation from one another, when we plant a mini forest, we're planting trees in relation to one another in a forest community. And this stimulates interactions among the plants and with soil microorganisms in a way that makes the ecosystem as a whole thrive. Then the other sense of the word revolution is just simply how quick the idea of planting ecologically robust mini forests or tiny forests has taken off around the world just in the past 5-10 years. And so with the book, what I wanted to do was collect these stories of people who are working with nature to plant mini forests. And so I had the privilege of speaking with Daan in the Netherlands, who we'll hear from in just a minute. And I also talked to people in Cameroon, Lebanon, England, India, France, Iran, Japan, China, and the US. And these stories are just a small collection of what's going on around the world in terms of planting mini forests. So when you plant a mini forest, you're using the Miyawaki method. And there are a few key variables that go into this. And one is species composition. You're planting a diverse mix of native climax forest species. And you're not only planting the tall canopy trees, but you're also planting mid-sized understory trees and shrubs. And often you're doing this on what is starting out as degraded land, degraded soil. And so we need to improve that soil, improve the topsoil in order to plant into it. We're planting densely. Usually it's about 3 plants per square meter or square yard. And then we're mulching heavily to protect the soil in the first few years while the little forest is getting established. So I mentioned the word climax species, and that's the species that grows in at the end of the process of natural ecological succession. So in this 100 to 200 year timeline, when you start out on the left with bare ground, and at first you get smaller, fast growing, short living plants that colonize the area. But over time, the plants get bigger, longer living, until eventually you get pioneer trees. And in the shade of those pioneer trees, you may have the shade tolerant climax species that grow up and take over the canopy. And since they are shade tolerant and the plants that came before them are not shade tolerant, they basically take hold there, and the earlier successional plants disappear, or they just colonize the sunny edges of the forest. And so what you have is a forest whose basic species composition is going to be pretty stable over a long period of time. So what the Miyawaki method does is it sidesteps that long process of natural succession and plants the climax species directly. But first, we have to do the work that all of those earlier successional species would have done to improve the soil and the site and the conditions of the site. And so we do that by decompacting the soil and adding lots of organic material. And so even though the climax species tolerate shade, they grow best in direct sunlight. So by planting these species in good soil, good topsoil, and full sun via the Miyawaki method, they grow quickly and form a canopy that shades out other species and keeps the soil and the interior humid and cool. And in this way, the little ecosystem becomes self-sustaining within just about 3 years. And I think Dr. Miyawaki's colleague, Dr. Elgene Box, describes it well when he says the logic of Miyawaki's method is to create a permanent canopy of climax tree species directly without going through successional stages. This creates a more humid, shady forest microclimate as quickly as possible. One of the really great joys of writing the book, it was learning about people's stories all over. And it was also learning about Dr. Miyawaki himself, who was really, really a great person who I came to be very fond of, even though I never talked to him directly, but just through reading and listening to him speak in videos. And so he was a botanist or plant ecologist from Japan who studied weeds as a graduate student. Over his 50-year career, he planted forests in nearly 3,000 places in Japan and around the world. And for his global environmental leadership, he was awarded the Blue Planet Prize in 2006. So just by these numbers, you get a sense of the depth of his engagement in the world. But his words, too, are also very telling. So I'm just going to read you one line from his Blue Planet Acceptance Speech Prize. He said, "I myself am resolved to continue to plant trees, starting from where I stand and spreading out to the whole world, so long as I have life left in my body." And he really did that. He was planting, he was participating in planting festivals up as long as he possibly could. So one of the stories I tell in the book is about a planting festival that Dr. Miyawaki led at the age of 86 at an auto parts plant in Madison, Indiana. And this facility is the facility whose parent company is in Japan. And I like this story because it exemplifies the type of projects that Miyawaki led, which were often in collaboration with Japanese industrial companies and typically involving hundreds of people at a planting event. And he began his planting events, the planting festivals, with a naming ceremony where somebody would call out the name of the main tree species that were going to be planted, and everybody else gathered would repeat the name 3 times. And the idea was to get people really familiar with the local forest species, the local tree species that they were going to be planting. So Miyawaki led many international projects over the years, like the one in Madison, Indiana. And in 2009, he went to Bangalore in India to lead a planting festival at a Toyota facility. So Shubhendu Sharma was an engineer at that Bangalore plant at the time. And Shubhendu volunteered to participate in that planting. And he quickly became fascinated with the Miyawaki method. He began researching forests. He experimented by planting a forest in his backyard. And he decided in the end to quit his job, which had really been a job he loved at Toyota, to start a forest planting company for one simple reason, or this is in his words, this, meaning the Miyawaki method, is something everyone should know. And so he, in 2014, with a few years of forest planting under his belt, he gave a TED Talk to get the Miyawaki method out there into the world just a little bit more. And this 5-minute video went viral and inspired a whole new wave of forest makers in Europe and around the world. One of the forest makers that Shubendu inspired and taught was Adib Dada, an architect in Beirut, Lebanon, whose story is featured in the book. And in 2019, Adib began planting what is now a 2,200 square meter Miyawaki forest beside the Beirut River. And as you can see on the left here, the river looks and functions more like a sewer of sorts than as a river, on account of it having been paved many years ago. The sides and the bottom are all cement. But now a young native ecosystem is growing along a small stretch of its cement banks. So in 2020, an accidental nitrate explosion at the port of Beirut killed about 200 people, 250. Thousands were injured in the blast, and hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes or businesses. And Adib told me that the whole population really just felt violated by this horrible incident. And he realized that the Miyawaki method could play an even more profound and therapeutic role in helping people process their sense of loss. So on the 1-year anniversary of the blast, Adib's team and families who had lost a loved one planted a memorial forest in a small city park. And in the picture on the right, you can see that they wrote the names of each victim on handmade paper and planted those names, one per tree. And then it's those families and a group of local children who are taking care of the forest in its first years as it gets established. The Adib and his team are now also working with schools, starting with those most affected by the explosion. And here on the left, you have a microforest, very small in a cutout of an otherwise concrete play space. And then on the right, you have narrow forest planted at a Beirut school just a few weeks ago. And Adib believes that nature can help people heal. And in his words, we can heal the land damaged by the explosion and urbanization, while the land heals us through the act of planting. And I think this idea is worth contemplating in the US, where we're reeling from some really painful recent events. And I think it's worth asking what role nature can play in helping individuals and communities heal, and how we can create opportunities for people and the land to help heal each other. Ecologically and socially, the main benefits of planting small native forests accrue locally, and yet at the same time, planting native ecosystems is a way to show global solidarity. And so the main message I want to share is that ecosystem restoration starts, like Miyawaki said, right where you are standing, wherever that may be, and you start by building a team. And something I learned from the process of researching the book and working on a mini forest myself is that you will find at least a few folks with a real fire in their belly to heal the land anywhere in the world. You will also find people who are knowledgeable in local plant ecology, and you'll need them. And you will always find lots of people with a team spirit who are ready to pitch in for the public good. And everywhere in the world, you will find kids who, practically by the definition of the word child, are itching to get their hands in the dirt. So that's the end of my presentation.
Wow, fantastic. Thanks, Hannah. I have plenty of questions in my mind alone, but I feel another wave coming on. Hopefully everyone else feels it too. This is hopefully start of another wave. So Dan, I guess you're up next. Can't wait to hear your stories from the Netherlands.
Great to be part of this mini forest webinar. Very excited to see how the idea is taking off. And I think for the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to share my journey and experiences with the Miyawaki Method in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is part of the northwestern Europe. We're a very densely populated country, about 17 million people. So it's been called a not so densely populated city. So I think it's the third most densely populated country in the world. So there's not a lot of space. So that's why the mini forest first caught my attention. Well, I think a bit about myself. I live in the very center of the Netherlands with my wife and my two boys, 5 and 2 years old. As David says, I love to draw, spend time in nature, plant trees. And about 7 years ago, I started up the tiny forest movement in the Netherlands. Well, this is a bit of our artistic impression of the tiny forest, and basically my dream for every school, every community, company, or business park in the world to have their very own tiny forest or a small haven for life. And as you can see, it has butterflies, birds, and especially people enjoying and connecting to nature and connecting to each other. So how did this all start? This is a picture of me when I was 10 years old. This is a picture of me in my favorite climbing tree. And my mom just started working for one of the biggest female magazines in the Netherlands. And we had a gallery of pictures in the magazine. And I wanted to take a picture with my favorite tree because the municipality had decided to cut this tree down. And my sister, my friends, and I, we formed an action committee to save this tree. So we collected autographs, we wrote to the municipality and the city council. But yeah, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, well, the people living next door, they had a lot of moist under the floor, and they thought that was more important, and we lost our tree. And I think about 6 or 7 years ago, I found this picture again. I had forgotten all about it. And it made me wonder, why did I want to save this tree? Because we didn't have that much environmental education in school. And when I started thinking about it, it was just basically the environment in which I grew up. It was a small town, about 1,300 people living there, very wooded area. We had a big garden with flowers, large trees in it. So I think just being surrounded by nature, immersed in nature, made me fall in love with nature at a very young age. And when my favorite piece of nature was endangered, we wanted to protect it. This is basically the visualization of what the world is going through, the massive urbanization that is taking place in the world right now. As of 2016, more than half of the world's population lives in cities. And that urbanization has some consequences. And one of those consequences is massive deforestation. Well, according to our best estimates, the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. Well, if we would scale that to 46 years, the human race has been around for 4 hours, and the Industrial Revolution began 1 minute ago. And in that time span of that 1 minute, we've destroyed 50%, half of the world's forests. This is the picture you can see right next to it is a forest map, the forest cover map of Europe. But even in Sweden and Finland, where you can see there's a massive forest cover, most of it is for production wood purposes. So it's always wood that's needed for people to build our buildings, to use for furniture. So the old growth forest is really diminishing. I think in Europe, we have about 3% of our old growth forest left. And just to make a comparison, Brazil still has 60% left. So we're very critical of Brazil, but they tend to take care better. They've taken better care of their primary forest than we have in Europe. This is a map of the deforestation in the United States for the past 300 years. So you could see the East Coast was basically covered. It was one big forest, and well, after the Europeans started arriving, that started to being cut down. So well, this map shows how much forest has been lost and how much primary old growth forest has been lost. And the Miyawaki method is a great way of restoring that once lost forest, one patch at a time. So I think it stresses the need to restore our forest and basically to restore our connection to the forest, because if we start feeling about this forest the way I did about my climbing tree when I was young, we probably will take better care of it. Well, and urbanization has an other effect, and one that maybe even frightens me more than the massive deforestation. Well, these are two kids. They're called Yasin and Zineb, and the boy on the left, I think it was in 2014, about 8 years ago, I was interviewing him because we were regreening a schoolyard, and I wanted to know, what were your favorite things to do in nature when you were a smaller kid? Because I was 10 years old right here. And as it turned out, he didn't have any memories of nature. He had never been to a beach or a forest or even a city park. And that really scared me, because I thought, because when I got home, I was a bit shocked, and I started looking up where he lived and where the nearest forest was, and it was just 2 kilometers, which is about a mile and a half from his home. But he had never been there, and that's what studies show, that kids these days only can roam around 300 yards from their homes. So the area in which they can move freely is becoming smaller and smaller. So there's less place to connect to nature. And these kids are facing immense environmental problems. We're dealing with climate change, loss of biodiversity, insect collapse. And yet about half of these kids never go to nature. I think in that around that time, 2014, I was still deciding if I wanted to have kids, but it really gave me sleepless nights, kept me awake at nights, dealing with this problem. All these kids never going to nature, and all these big environmental problems. So how can we fix this? How can we reconnect them to nature within this very small space of 300 yards from their home? And I think, well, thinking about this, fortunately, a couple of months later, I ran into this TED Talk by Shubhendu Sharma. And he shows within 5 minutes, and I recommend everybody to watch this TED Talk, how to convert any piece of land, whether it's a parking lot, a desert, or any piece of barren land, into a lush green forest. And it just takes 2 or 3 years. And the awesome thing about it is a forest didn't have to be big, but it could be as small as a tennis court, which is basically 200 square meters. I'm not really good with the measurements in the United States, so sorry for using the metric system. And so it was really a really great idea, and I reached out to Shubhendu. And I'm gonna fast forward a little bit in time, because a year after speaking to him, Shubhendu came to the Netherlands, and we created our very first tiny forest. And this is what it looked like at day one. 600 young saplings in a basically a prepared soil, 1 meter deep. It was a heavy clay soil, so we had to loosen it up, add some nourishment into it, and we mulched it with wheat straw, and there's a chestnut fencing around it. But it was an exciting time, because we didn't know if this Miyawaki method would work, because Shubhendu had done a lot of work in the desert, in the tropics. This was the first time it was tried in a temperate region where we live. But a lot of people like me were curious about this method and the potential to regrow forest and to add biodiversity into an urban setting. And the Ministry of Agriculture, they decided to help us to create a time-lapse video of the growth. So I'd like to share with you a 2-minute video of 2 years of growth of our first tiny forests. Oh, it was quite a relief that the method really seemed to work in terms of growth. This is a picture I took last year in June 2021. And as you can see, the green line, that is the Miyawaki forest. But on the very same day, the municipality of Zaanstad, that's where we planted our first forest, they planted a mini forest themselves. The more traditional way municipalities would do that. And this was actually a great way of cooperating, so we could compare the two different methods in terms of growth. Well, and as you can see, the green line represents the growth of the Miyawaki forest, and the red line, the one of the municipality, more traditional approach to creating a forest. And this perspective shows a little bit better of how the forest grows. So the green line, again, the Miyawaki forest, the red line, the municipality forest. This is June 2016, and 5 years later, well, you can see what happened to the blue line represents the highest tree in the Miyawaki forest, and the red line is the municipality forest. So in terms of growth, it's more than double the size of the forest right next to it. We have been comparing both plots in terms of biodiversity as well. And next week we'll have another publication coming out by Wageningen University, which will show the difference in development of the biodiversity of the two plots. So we were really surprised and amazed, even the landscapers and ecologists we work with, at the growth rate of these forests. But to us, a tiny forest was more than just a fast-growing forest. There were basically three things that we feel are very important. First of all, we want to honor the life's work of Akira Miyawaki and Shubhendu Sharma. So we want to use the Miyawaki method to plant these forests. Well, secondly, we want to reconnect urban children to nature. So every forest we plant in public spaces are adopted by a school or a childcare facility, and they so we can reconnect kids to nature. And the other thing is that we want it to be a community forest as well, where people help with maintenance too. So a little bit more about these 3 points briefly, because there's an entire course to be followed on each and every single step of this. So first of all, Miyawaki method, I think Hannah's already shared a lot. At the heart of the method is finding out what the native species are for that region, for the soil type, and doing a very good and thorough native vegetation survey. We plant densely, just like a forest would if it grew up by itself. There would be a lot of saplings growing up, so three per square meter. And we prepare the soil so it's loose, it's nutritious, it retains water and has good drainage as well. And the mulch helps to nourish the soil and to protect the soil from UV radiation and from frost as well. And it prevents a little bit of weed growth in the early stages of the forest. So the second part is planting with kids. So we always want the kids to plant their own trees. They get a tree tag, they name their tree, and they will follow the tree for a year using their passport to follow the growth, to see what animals come and live there. We train teachers to use the forest as an outdoor classroom, so they'll go through a training program devised by IVN to use it as an outdoor classroom, and not just teach about nature, but teach math, language skills outdoors as well. And the kids, for a month or a period of 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, will be the rangers, and that's when they actually do tasks that an actual actual forest ranger would do in a larger forest. So they'll show people around, they'll clean up litter, they'll do small maintenance or repairs. And this is a way we engage kids with the forest, and this the curriculum we have from ages 0 through 12 helps them to grow up with the forest, and well, basically to see the forest go through different stages. So when you get to the school, you'll grow up with the forest and see how it develops. So yeah, this is a way for us to connect kids all throughout primary school with the forest. One other thing that we discovered is that we need to make sure that local communities want to have the forest there. We've had it on one or two occasions where the local community wasn't on board, and then that gives all kinds of problems. So we've basically turned the process around. And we say we're not going to plant it until a local community asks us to come and help and come and plant a forest, because this is the only way to make sure that there's a community of people, of kids and locals who will help with maintenance and who will use it as a meeting place, as a place for connection, of social cohesion, of education. So these are the three things to us that make a mini forest or a tiny forest. And I think in 2018, I'll share a little bit more about our progress in the Netherlands. We received a massive boost from the Dutch Postcode Lottery. It's a major donor in our country. And they gave us the money to create 100 tiny forests, to partner up with 24 municipalities, to engage 100 schools and 100 communities, and to do scientific research into the effects of the tiny forests, and not just biodiversity, but carbon sequestering, the effect on the heat island effect, and water retention. And one thing we really cared about was to empower people to do it themselves, to create resources so people could take matters into their own hands and plant these forests themselves without our help. So if we look at the development of our forests, you can see here in 2015, we planted our first forest. Right now we have 166 tiny forests in public spaces. That's the green line. And those are the tiny forests with communities and that are adopted by schools. But we've also, since 2019, been giving courses about how to create a tiny forest in your backyard, and about 80 people have created a tiny forest of 100 square meters or larger in their backyards. And that's one of our volunteers. She has organized the courses, and she teaches people how to convert their their backyards into forests. And I think this winter we'll have a new group joining us of 20, so we'll reach the 100 threshold of backyard forest as well. So this is a map of the Netherlands, and as you can see, the green dots represent our partner municipalities. We wanted to partner up with 24 municipalities, but when we started recruiting municipalities, we got so much response that we ended up working with an additional 50 municipalities. And well, we're extremely happy and proud of the geographical spread throughout the country. So it's really a national concept now that has reached cities in the north, west, south, and east. Well, if we look at the research, unfortunately, I'm very happy that the report is coming out next week, but we'll have new results next week. I'll make sure to send you a copy of the report and the findings, but I'm not allowed to share those yet. So we have ecologists of Wageningen University and Research. They have been following, they followed the tiny forest in Zaanstad for 1 year in 2017. And from 2018 to 2022, they followed 11 tiny forests throughout the Netherlands. And I did that, and I think Dave would like that, with about 100 citizen science joined our team to help with the monitoring of the biodiversity. And so far, they've discovered 934 different species of plants and animals in the forests. They also calculated the carbon sequestration capacity of the forest. In 2020, it was 127 kilograms of CO2 per year per tiny forest. And they expect this will rise to 250 kgs per year. If you look at the Zaanstad forest that I just showed you, that already sequesters about 650 kgs of CO2 per year. I myself found this a very abstract number, so I started looking into what does it actually mean, 250 kilograms of CO2. It's about 1,000 kilometers, so I think that's about 750 miles by car. So if you drive in an average car, if you drive about 750 miles, that's the amount of CO2 you will emit. So that's what a tiny forest can sequester per year. But as the trees age, they tend to sequester more. So another thing they took a look at was the cooling capacity of a forest. We already know this. If everybody who's sat in the shade of a tree on a hot summer day knows it's cooler beneath the tree. But they calculated this and they found that on a hot summer day, about 30 degrees Celsius. I'm really sorry, but I didn't know the Fahrenheit of this. So it's really warm. The road temperature was 40 degrees Celsius and the forest floor was 17 degrees Celsius. So that's a 23 degrees Celsius difference in forest floor and in the street temperature. So this shows the cooling capacity of the forest, and as the forest ages and gets more leaves, the cooling capacity will increase. They also calculated how much water the forest retains. So they calculated that these 11 forests between 2018 and 2020 have retained or processed 6 million liters of rainwater, which replenishes the groundwater, and it doesn't go into the sewer anymore because we now have a loose, nutritious soil that actually makes sure we replenish the groundwater. So there's a big water retention capacity of these forests. The forest floor develops into some kind of a sponge because of the humus buildup and the soil life. So these are the findings until 2020. So next week we'll have some new results. We'll update that on our website. And Wageningen has informed me too that they will immediately translate the report into English as well. So it will be available for English readers as well. These are the numbers of the number of people who are involved in our project, because we could not have done this project without the help of our local residents and our teachers. The orange line represents the number of teachers. About 1,500 teachers have joined our Tiny Forest program and were trained in the outdoor education module. About 2,000 or 1,700 local citizens have helped us, and they are active in these local keeper teams. And because of their efforts and the effort of my team, we've been able to train just under 18,000, I think 17,800 tiny forest rangers so far. And the great thing is that each year we'll train new tiny forest rangers because the schools will keep on running the tiny forest program. One thing that was very important to us was to make sure that people could take matters into their own hand, because I think when we first started Zaanstad, I got so many questions, and right now I get emails 4 or 5 different countries every week. How do we create a tiny forest? Can you help us? So I think from the first day onwards, we started creating handbooks. So we've already created 3 versions. The last 2 versions have been translated in English. You can download them from our website. And I think in October we'll have a whole new platform up and running with a brand new e-learning. We'll publish another book, and you'll be able to follow the online course if you would like to learn how to create a tiny forest yourself. We'll be publishing a book too about how to convert your garden into a mini forest. Unfortunately for you guys, it will be in Dutch, so I recommend buying Hannah's book. That would be much more helpful for you to do. And because of this do-it-yourself approach, this open source approach where we just shared our knowledge, we gained a lot of traction internationally as well. This is a picture of us visiting Shubendu. We went to India to create a tiny forest in the Thar desert, very harsh circumstances. We stayed there for a week to be trained in the method, and we created a patch of 500 square meter desert forest. That's what it means, Maruvan, forest of the desert. And about 2 years ago, I started partnering up with Earthwatch in England. I believe Earthwatch is a citizen science organization in the US as well. And this is the planting location of the first tiny forest in England. I was there in March 2020. And ever since then, they've already planted 100 tiny forests in the UK alone. So that took us 7 years to do. So I'm really amazed at the progress they've made. Well, this is a picture of the first tiny forest we've created in Belgium. It's in the municipality of Schoten. And we have a partner in Belgium as well, Good Planet. They're not moving as fast as Earthwatch, but they are moving at the pace we were moving at in the first 2 or 3 years. They have about 10 forests in place right now. And we're looking to expand our network of European partners, because we like training people and making sure they're able to do it and start up a program. So that's what we're going to do in the next few years, is help other European countries to set up this movement as well. And another branch or another group of forest makers is emerging, and it's business parks. And this is a forest we created at Leicester Buildings, a wood construction company, and they converted 22 parking lots into a native woodland. And so far, I've assisted 3 business parks in creating a forest on their parking lots or on their business premises. And we're starting to include things like forest therapy trails, outdoor working spaces, to really connect the workers' force to nature, and to, basically reap the benefits of the attention restoration benefits of being in nature, being outdoors, which boosts health, creativity, pride of the workforce. So I think this will be an interesting project moving forward. So yeah, that was about it. This is my last slide about the tiny forest movement in the Netherlands. We're very proud of what we've done so far, but we still have some big plans for our little forests. We've just partnered up with a large construction company, and then they're going to help us to create another 100 tiny forests in the next few years. So very excited about that. We want to team up with these business parks to create 100 outdoor working spaces surrounded by tiny forests. And we're looking to launch a platform to create a network of EU countries, but maybe we can expand to the US as well if necessary. But there's already a few people in the US working on these tiny forests, so it might be good to connect you to them as well. So we want to train people in the EU to set up this movement themselves. So we'll be launching a platform, and we'll be helping other countries to set this up. And the other thing is that we'll continue to give courses online and offline to help people convert their garden into a mini forest. So this was the story about tiny forest in the Netherlands. I always close off with this as Chief Tree Planting Officer, or C3PO. So may the forest be with you.
Wow, thanks, Dan. That was the revolution is alive and well in the Netherlands. It's great to see. Wow. There's a lot of questions. Many of them, some of them have been answered. Like, is there a guide, whether it's been done in a desert environment or not? I'd like to hear Hannah and Dan actually interact a little bit. If you have any questions of each other or comments.
So, I have a quick question, Dan. I hadn't seen the picture before of the 2 side-by-side Zaandam forests, where one was the Miyawaki method and one was not. But I couldn't remember, what are the main differences in how those were planted that produced such different results? Was it a species difference or something else?
Well, I think there was a different. There were a couple of differences. I think the plots of the municipality, we didn't prepare the soil, and we didn't mulch, but they seeded herb vegetation, which is basically a slower mulch because it dies off within 1 or 2 years, and then mulches the floor anyway. But no soil preparation, different species, and And what they did is include older and higher trees in their forest. So I think when they already planted them, they chose about, I think, 10 to 15 bigger trees that were already 3 to 4 meters high.
Mm.
And we just planted small dense saplings. And what we did, I think the Miyawaki method is faster in terms of growth, but this forest that we planted, we planted basically too many pioneers. So we planted a lot of willow species, poplar species, and they tend to be fast growing too. So there's a very big difference in growth rate. So it's in the soil, it's in the way of mulching, and it's in the species selection.
I find one of the key features being the link to education and getting people to actually work in nature. And I've always, really, when you think about it, the oldest continuous human activity is natural history and knowing something about the species. And I think that's such a critical part. I'm really happy to see that it's so well integrated into education and things like forest therapy trails. Because the original insight really was lit with two parts: reforesting and also and connecting ourselves to the forest. I actually coined a term, I call it reforestation. That kind of does both of those things. Pretty amazing. One question that has come up several times is, how much does this cost? How do you finance something like this? I imagine the soil remediation, especially in urban areas where there's really highly compacted, degraded soil, sometimes just like fill. What are the costs? And how do you get the money?
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between whether it's planted in a private garden or whether it's planted in a public space. So if you look at the public space tiny forests, I think on average we'll spend about 20,000 euros on the project. About 12,000 of those costs will go into procuring trees, doing soil preparation, buying fencing, landscaper costs. And the other amount will go into basically the engagement of the community and schools. If you look at just private people planting a forest in their backyards, well, I've seen people plant really expensive forests, just like the ones we plant in public spaces, but I've seen people do it for like 1,000 euros, 200, 300 square meter forest, just by being really smart about how to source your materials. So I think if you spend a lot of time doing mapping, basically doing the vegetation survey, being smart about the soil, have a local network of basically farmers or forest rangers. I think it can be done rather cheaply, but on average, on those 166 forests, we spend about 20,000 euros per forest. And that's if it's planted on lawn, and if we had to remove pavements, so if we remove tarmac or tiles, it tends to get more expensive. And I think the soil prep, it's one of the biggest costs to do that, because you need an excavator. So we have been improving upon our soil testing, so we don't always have to dig as deep as we first did, because we used to go meter deep always, and supplement, well, depending on the soil type, but by improving our soil testing and actually looking very closely at the density of the soil, because I think that's the most important part that prevents the roots from growing if the soil is too compacted. I think we have improved on the soil prep, and we're having to spend less money on that. And I think the second question, where do we find the money? I think half of the money comes from the municipalities and our local partners. And we have our regional governments. The provinces, they tend to finance a lot. And of course, we have this massive donation by private donor, the postcard lottery. And we had some more private donors pitching in because they just like the concept of mini forest, biodiversity, and connecting it with kids and communities. So I think it's been a mix between business, corporate sponsorships, public funding. We haven't used crowdfunding that much, but I know a lot of urban foresters use the Sugi crowdfunding site to fund their forests. We're fortunate enough that we have done really well in terms of fundraising, so we didn't need to do that.
Maybe I'll just add, speaking of crowdfunding, I think when we planted a small forest in the town in France where I live, well, we had a few small grants, but then when we asked community members to contribute for a portion of the funding, people did right away, and they did it by sort of sponsoring a certain number of trees, and so it was really a nice surprise to see how quickly local people contributed to that. And then the city, most cities have a landscaping team, and so if you're partnering with the city may be willing to contribute in-kind support in terms of the soil preparation, the land preparation, and using city equipment for that, which can cut down on sort of the cash costs. And then one other thing, well, what Miyawaki always suggested was growing the seedlings. So going out and collecting the acorns, collecting the different seeds that you're going to use, and then growing those seedlings for a couple years. Not long. So Dan mentioned that you're planting really small ones. They're, a couple feet tall. So you're not growing them for a really long time, which means they're less expensive to begin with when you buy them from the nursery, although you're buying so many. But if you grow them yourselves, that could be a cool thing to do with schools. And I don't know if any of the schools you worked with have gotten into growing the seedlings at all, to either to cut down on costs or to add to the learning experience. But that was something that I think Miyawaki did a lot with, was collecting the seedlings with kids and then having the kids plant them to grow little saplings.
I like that idea. Again, getting the kids involved. It's consistent with, cognitive moral theory, right? I mean, you have this connection to these plants, individuals and the forest collectively at the individual level, growing them, and community-wise, planting it and visiting it. And that affects our morality. It affects the decisions we make. And so I think that movement have there any been, one of the questions is for Dan, I guess, is, have there been any follow-up studies with folks like looking at the effects on the people, or looking at pollinators, or looking at fungi, mycorrhizal networks, or when these forests over time, because you have a lot of years of being able to study these things now.
Well, I think what our ecologists, they did take soil samples, I think after a year or two, and they noticed that there were a lot of microorganisms, a lot of fungi, which was a good development, but these networks tend to develop rather slowly. So I think they did take some soil samples last year to compare them to 3 to 4 years earlier, but yeah, I haven't seen the results yet, so I don't know what the effects are right now when we look at the different soil samples from different years. We have looked at the pollinators, especially in early years. There's a lot of pollinators, but as the forest grows up and the canopy closes, the number of pollinators declines, and while the number of soil life it increases, because it's the microclimate is more suitable for soil life. So I'm expecting the fungi to develop really well, but I don't really have the evidence yet to support that claim. We will have it available shortly. So and in terms of I think there's a growing body of research on the effects of nature on people, and even the amount of songbirds in your direct environment, affects your happiness, your mood, how nature boosts creativity, how it boosts your immune system, how it actually changes the way your brain works. I think I have a lot of data on that too. I did not include it in this presentation, but I'd be happy to share a presentation with some research findings. I do think I have a great publication for you. I was really inspired by this journalist who does a lot of research on the brain, and he wrote this article for us, and how just a little bit of nature affects the development of the brain in young adults and children. So I'd be happy to share that with you. I'll have to look it up. I'll make sure you get it. So I think that's a very interesting read.
Right. Yeah. There's a huge body of evidence now, even at number of preterm births in an area being related to how much green space there is. So yeah, it's a great way to. And the other thing is that it's a whole community approach. It's not just planting trees, individually. It's done in the context of community, which I was reading a bit about Miyawaki, who was talking about how he started this whole thing by noticing that around cities, there weren't many indigenous species. And I see this as sort of an extension of what we do here, at least in the States, is a land acknowledgement of indigenous peoples. I think this is an extension beyond humans to non-human indigenous creatures. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It's getting us back to, connections with nature, especially in the cities where in this modern world, we tend to be fairly disconnected from nature. Let me try to pick a few questions here. What about any criticisms of the method? Forest for the trees kind of thing. The density of the plants and how rapid it is really not a real forest. I mean, and how do you control, like if you can have a bunch of control for mistakes made in quality control of Miyawaki forests, I guess.
I think there has been criticism, especially of the soil preparation and the dense planting. I think those are the two main criticisms. So why do you dig so deep? Because you destroy soil life. I think that's partially true, because if you, and that's why you need to really look at your location and analyze the soil that's there. If you have a loose, nutritious soil, leave it be, just plant the trees. But in urban setting, the soil is so messed up. I don't think you can even call it soil. It's just building sand or something. So we need to prepare it. So, but if you go outside of the city and if you have better soil, I think they have a good point. I think it's good to analyze the soil. So I think that's one of the biggest criticisms this method has. I think it costs too, because of the soil preparation, the dense planting, it tends to be expensive. And I think the dense planting has been it's still a hot item in the Netherlands, and I think that's why I talked at the beginning of my presentation about production forests. And I think all of our forest makers have been trained in creating production wood. We need straight trees, Just 2 weeks ago, I visited an old growth forest in the south of England, which is a temperate rainforest. And there's no straight tree there. It's just all. It's extremely beautiful, but it's not like a tree plantation. So I think we've forgotten what an actual old growth forest looks like, and that's what we're trying to recreate. So I think those are the different criticisms we've received.
I imagine you could even seed mycorrhizae, fungal spores right into it, and maybe experiment with that too.
Yeah, I think Shubendu does that. He actually has a recipe for compost tea. He uses that. We haven't used it so far, but I think that's a very interesting approach, and we should experiment with that.
What about biochar or any other kind of soil amendments like that?
Yeah, I think that would be great to experiment with. I agree.
Yeah. How old is the oldest Miyawaki forest in existence? Do we know?
The first one that he planted was with a Nippon Steel Company in 1971. So it's about 50 years old now.
Wow.
Yeah. they look like forests that have always been there. And there was one person I interviewed for the book who saw a Miyawaki forest when he was younger, and it was a few decades old by that time. But it was planted at Yokohama University, and he said to his dad, "Wow, they really planted this university very carefully not to disturb the forest that was already here."
Ah,
And his dad said, "No, well, actually, they planted the forest pretty recently, but it looked so mature and natural that it seemed like it had always been there, and even preceding the university to this young person who had observed."
and there is evidence that humans have this kind of natural attraction to wild-like patterns and places too. So I can imagine studies of the impact on people would be really interesting as well.
Yeah.
And what about the size ranges of these forests? And has anyone ever tried to, like, maybe this is a question that came up a few times, plant food trees there to make sort of like a food garden forest kind of thing?
Well, I think these are two different concepts because I think Miyawaki is about restoring the forest that once was there. And if we look at it might be different in the region you're from, but I think we just have about 5 or 6 edible species of native trees. We do have a very interesting food forest movement in the Netherlands, but they basically just plant exotic species because they have fruits and nuts. And so to me, it's two different concepts because we have like hazel, and some people say chestnut, but it's non-native. So we don't have a lot of edible species. So to me, it's two different concepts. So Miyawaki would never prefer to just focus on food. He would prefer to focus on restoring the forest that once was.
Right.
And then regarding size, well, Dan mentioned the backyard forests that are like 100 square meters, which is, I guess, about half the size of the ones you do with schools. But we saw that picture of a newly planted, I think it was a 48 square meter circular forest. Well, at this point, it's more of a stand of trees, but a really micro forest at the school in Beirut. And then on the larger end of the spectrum, one of the forests Miyawaki planted was in China near the Great Wall, and it was about 30 hectares. So that took an enormous team of volunteer planters. Took them several years coming back to work on it.
I want to thank you again for these great presentations and for filling our minds full of ideas about mini forests. And I want one in my backyard. I want one at my university. I actually recently proposed that we put one in my university. I think it goes perfectly well at the college level. I think it'd be a great way for our students to engage in citizen science. Something that's, I think, really essential here. It's the one thing we can do with climate change to really make a big difference, in addition to maybe eating less meat and turning off lights. But it's really, I just love this community scale of it. I think it's just what we need, especially in urban areas. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, David and Dan and Paula and everybody who made this possible.
And thank you all. And Biodiversity for a Livable Climate certainly looks forward to doing further education and creation of Miyawaki forests. And we look forward to being in touch soon again with the panelists and very much with the audience.